The rain tapped lightly against the windshield as Daniel drove through the darkened streets. His mind heavy with the weight of a long week. His supervisor had asked him to stay late again, but for once he declined. Something inside him, something he couldn't quite explain, pulled him back toward home. Maybe it was the way his daughter's voice lingered in his ears when she begged him at breakfast, "Daddy, come home early today." Maybe it was just exhaustion. Whatever it was, he turned the car toward his neighborhood instead of the office, unaware that the decision would tear his life apart. The house was quiet when he pulled into the driveway. Too quiet. Usually at that hour, he'd hear the faint sound of cartoons drifting through the living room window, or his daughter's playful laughter echoing down the hall. Tonight there was only silence, broken only by the low rumble of thunder in the distance. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The air felt different, tense, heavy, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. As he set his keys down, he caught something. So faint he thought at first he imagined it. A whimper. It wasn't the whimper of a tired child or the restless sound of sleep. It was sharp, muffled, and filled with fear. His heart tightened instantly. He followed the sound, each step slower, quieter, as though instinct warned him not to rush. His feet carried him down the hallway toward his daughter's room. The closer he came, the clearer it grew, and along with it came another sound, his wife's voice, low, harsh, like a stranger's. He reached the doorway and froze. The sight before him was one his mind refused to process at first. His little girl sat curled in the corner of her bed, her small hands raised in defense, tears streaking her cheeks. Standing over her, with an expression cold and unrecognizable, was his wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart, his home, his child. She gripped the girl's wrist too tightly, her words cutting like knives. Daniel's chest constricted as if the world had collapsed inward. He couldn't breathe. For a moment he stood paralyzed, torn between disbelief and fury. Then instinct took over. "Enough!" His voice roared through the room, shattering the suffocating silence. His wife spun around, her eyes wide with shock, her hands still frozen in midair. Their daughter bolted toward him, throwing herself into his arms, clinging with desperate strength. He held her close, his trembling hand covering her head, shielding her from the world. His wife's lips moved, trying to form words, excuses, something to undo what he had just seen, but nothing could. "Daniel, you don't understand," she stammered, her voice cracking. But all he could see was the fear in his daughter's eyes and the red marks already forming on her delicate skin. The woman before him was no longer his partner, no longer the person he thought he knew. She was someone else entirely, a stranger who had crossed an unforgivable line. His daughter sobbed into his shirt, her tiny body shaking, and he whispered gently, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now. You're safe." But even as he said the words, he wondered if she would ever truly feel safe again. His own chest ached with guilt. How long had this been happening when he wasn't there? How many times had his long hours at work left his little girl defenseless? The questions burned through him like acid, but he forced them aside, focusing only on holding her tighter. His wife reached for him for the child, but Daniel stepped back, his voice low and venomous. "Don't touch her." The warning in his tone froze her hand midair. Her face twisted, anger flickering behind her eyes, but beneath it he saw something else. Fear, not of him, but of what this truth meant. She had been caught. There was no turning back. Daniel knew in that moment everything had changed. The family he thought he had built, the trust he thought was unshakable, had crumbled into ash. He guided his daughter out of the room, past his wife, who stood rooted in place, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He didn't look at her again. Not then. His focus was only on the trembling child in his arms. Downstairs, he sat on the couch with his daughter, holding her until her sobs quieted into hiccups. He wiped her tears with the sleeve of his shirt, his heart breaking at the sight of her fragile face, the innocence already fractured. "You're safe now," he repeated softly, though the words tasted bitter. He had promised to protect her from everything, yet here they were. Her greatest danger had come from within the very home meant to keep her safe. The hours that followed blurred together. His wife tried to explain, to excuse, to twist the narrative into something less monstrous, but Daniel didn't listen. Every sound of her voice felt like poison. The only thing that mattered was his daughter's small hand clutching his, refusing to let go even when she drifted into an uneasy sleep against his chest. He watched her breathe, memorized the rise and fall of her chest, and vowed silently that nothing and no one would ever hurt her again. The night stretched endlessly. He sat awake, his thoughts warring inside him. He remembered the day he met his wife, the laughter they once shared, the dreams they once built. It all seemed like a cruel illusion now. He wondered how much of it had been real, and how much had been lies masking a darkness he had never seen. His heart ached not only for his daughter, but for the death of the life he thought he had. Morning light seeped through the curtains, pale and gray. His daughter stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw him, she smiled weakly, and that smile, though fragile, gave him strength. He kissed her forehead and whispered again, "Daddy's here." It became less of a reassurance and more of a promise etched into his soul. The days that followed were a storm of confrontation, decisions, and the painful unraveling of everything Daniel once believed in. He left his wife, filed for custody, and sought help for his daughter. Each step was heavy. Each conversation with lawyers and counselors felt like walking through fire. But he endured it all for the little girl who now looked at him as her entire world. He carried the weight of her broken trust, determined to rebuild it piece by piece, even if it took a lifetime. At night, when the house grew quiet, Daniel sometimes found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the doorway over and over. The image of his wife's cold expression, his daughter's terrified eyes, haunted him. He questioned everything, how he could have missed the signs, how he could have trusted so blindly. But amid the torment, one truth anchored him. He had walked in that night. He had seen. He had stopped it. And though their lives were scarred, there was still a chance for healing. His daughter began to smile more with time. She laughed again, though sometimes it was tinged with hesitation, as though testing the safety of joy. Daniel cherished every sound, every spark of light returning to her eyes. He read her stories at night, held her close when nightmares woke her, and reminded her every day that she was loved beyond measure. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges he could barely anticipate, but he no longer feared the unknown. The bond between father and daughter had been tested in the cruelest of ways, yet it had not broken. If anything, it had become unshakable, forged in fire and grief, but also in love that refused to let go. And though Daniel knew he would never forget the night he came home early, he also knew it was the night that saved his daughter's life, the night that opened his eyes, the night that transformed his love into something stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal, something eternal.